Next up, we have Dale J. Stephens. Dale J. Stephens is a sought-after education expert appearing on major news networks. He is also the best-selling author of Hacking Your Education, Ditch the Lectures. In May 2011, Stephens was selected out of hundreds of individuals around the world as a Peter Thiel Fellow, a program recognizing the top 24 entrepreneurs around the world under the age of 20. In addition to leading UnCollege, Stephens advises education and technology companies. Dale.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. As Grant said, I'm the founder of UnCollege, and sort of what we're doing has morphed into something called Gap Year, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today. I started UnCollege 4 years ago now, which seems crazy to me. It's the only thing I've done with my adult life. And it came out of this book that I said that I was going to write, and then someone said, you should write this book. And I went around and I interviewed people who had done interesting things with their lives without relying on formal education. They'd become doctors and lawyers and architects. But the key thing was that they had learned those skills on the job, not in the classroom. And so what I want to talk about today is what I learned from that book, how we've applied it to Gap Year, and sort of my own educational background and how I think that biases me in how I look at the world. What's been amazing to see is when I started doing this 4 years ago, people were like, that's crazy, right? Like, this will never work. UnCollege, what's that? It's so anti-institutional. And 4 years later, I have colleges coming to me saying, hey, we think what you're doing is really interesting. Can we partner with you? And so it's been amazing to see how much the dialogue has changed in just such a short period of time as educational institutions are increasingly realizing that their market share is vanishing. We've seen books coming out year after year. This is the most recent one that Kevin Carey, who runs education at the New America Foundation, which is one of the leading think tanks in DC, wrote. And it's increasingly clear that higher education is overpriced and under-delivering. So myself, I left school when I was 12. When I was 12, I came to my parents and said, hey, I don't really like this going to a class, being told what to do every day, sitting still. It's not really how I learn. And while my parents spent many sleepless nights wondering whether or not I would succeed outside of school, that was supposed to be a joke. It's a terrible picture of my parents. They said, hey, it's your life. You've got to start making your own decisions at some point. The worst case scenario is that you go back to school. School's not going to disappear. It's always going to be there. And if you want to try making your own choices and understanding your own life, go ahead. What's the worst that could possibly happen? So I ended up doing something called unschooling. And the key question around unschooling is not whether or not school is bad or good, but whether or not we think that children are capable of making their own choices. Do we think that children, if left to their own devices, will poke and prod and ask questions, or do we think that they will do mindless, unproductive things? And so I spent the years from 12 to 18 working on political campaigns, organizing groups in my own community. I helped build a library in my hometown. I went and crashed conferences in Silicon Valley, and even ended up working at a startup that actually helps people get into college. And there was, looking back on this, it seems incredibly ironic. And I recall when I was going off to college, the founder of this company said, hey, like, why are you leaving? You've got a job. And I was like, well, everyone else is doing it. There's supposed to be such a great social experience. There's all such societal and cultural wisdom that you gain by going to this institution. And it didn't hit me until I got to college and was on my orientation weekend and realized that I just hired someone who'd graduated from Harvard Business School to replace me at the job as an 18-year-old. That it struck me that, like, maybe that wasn't the best choice. So I spent my freshman year of college incredibly frustrated with what I was doing and sort of digging into the research of what is the difference between formal education and self-education. Graham also asked me to note that public schools are state schools here, of course, since I'm American. And the gap here is what's interesting is that not only do those who are self-taught outperform those who are in public school across subjects, they also outperform those in formal education irrespective of the factors that traditionally determine success in formal schooling, right? So the amount of money that parents spend on education ethnicity, the education attainment level of your parents, all those things don't matter if you're homeschooled or unschooled. And yet, despite all of that, I ended up at this small school in Arkansas called Hendrix. I'd wanted to go to a place that was going to help me become a smart, well-rounded human being. But the real problem was that I was doing this, right? I was doing exactly what I'm doing right now. Your brain doesn't learn by sitting passively and listening to someone talk. You have to poke things, you have to prod things, you have to constantly ask how what you're learning applies to you. And on top of that, it was really, really expensive. In the US, the cost of college has risen 350% since 1980. It's outpaced any other rising cost in the industry. College costs here have certainly risen in the last couple of years, but in the US, it's absolutely nuts. Not only that, but the actual value of degrees is declining. Earnings of college grads have declined in real dollars since 2000. Young people are increasingly under or unemployed, and people are taking on more and more debt to get degrees. Which leads folks like McKinsey to write long reports wondering, what is actually happening here? If we're just sending people to school to get more degrees, to what extent is a higher education institution adding any value, or is it simply a signaling mechanism? So I ended up dropping out, moving back to San Francisco, and starting UnCollege.org. I threw up a website, and a couple days later, someone from the Chronicle of Higher Education called and said, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is interesting." And I recall being on the phone with him, and sort of at the end of the interview, he was like, "So how long has your institution been around?" I was like, 3 days. And he ended up publishing the article, and it became this firestorm around the value of education, because I happened to say the right thing at the right time at the right place. And somewhere along the line, I said I was writing a book, and then Penguin picked this up. And it was a really interesting journey to be able to watch this over the course of the last 4 years. And what I really want to drive home today is not that education is changing, but that it's already happening, right? The future is already here. Startups are entering the field at an unprecedented rate. 30% of enrollments globally in higher ed are in the private sector. And we're increasingly seeing articles about colleges beginning to close as a result of financial instability. I think the most interesting example here is a company called General Assembly. They have 22 locations around the world. They run about 30,000 students a year. They specialize in short-term, high employability coding boot camps that take people from no experience to six-figure salaries in the course of 3 months. They run 30,000 students a year and didn't exist 4 years ago, right? And I think what's really interesting is that these things are happening. And colleges and institutions are starting to take note and say, hey, these guys are starting to eat my market share. I have to actually think about what value I am providing to students other than the college experience. So we ended up starting a program called Gap Year. Gap years in the US are not particularly common. We just decided to piggyback on the sort of idea that you should take time between high school and college as a route to get parents to do something different, right? A gap year to parents sounds safe. It sounds like something that you could do and go back to college. But we want to get students and say, hey, what are you doing? If you want to do something that is licensed, perhaps college is the right route. But if you're going to go to college or university, you should make sure that you're doing it with a clear intention and make sure that you're spending your time and money in effective ways. When I started out writing the book, people said, well, this is only going to work if you're really smart and really hardworking and really privileged. And it turned out that I was totally proven wrong. I found people who are self-taught in all fields from all walks of life. And I think the reason for that is that there's a high need for applied skills. People really want individuals who understand how to think critically, how to be creative, how to be persuasive. All these, what we think of as essentially meta-learning skills, the skills that make you a better and more effective learner. And that was the idea behind Gap Year. And the key notion was saying, well, if employers are asking for people who need to know how to negotiate, how to communicate, how to keep themselves motivated, how to give and get feedback, how to work in teams, then why don't we teach those skills explicitly rather than ask people to write reports on 17th century literature that they may not care about? And so that's what we did with gap year. And effectively, skip the video. Effectively, we teach these skills explicitly rather than ask people to write reports, do papers, all these kinds of things. We say, hey, what do you care about? And how can we help apply these skills to what you are interested in? Over the course of the year, students spend time abroad, they spend time in San Francisco, they spend time doing a coached internship, and then complete a project of their choosing. So at the end of the year, they come out with a whole portfolio. Every student has a coach that they work with one-on-one who helps them set goals, contextualize information. We have personal trainers, and the thought was, why don't we have coaches for learning to help you understand who you are, help you understand what you don't know that you don't know, and keep you on the right track. It's been 2 years. We've run about 70 fellows through the program. We've had people do all kinds of things, from work at startups to hardware companies to large insurance companies to all across the board. We've had fellows from 24 countries. We've had people start their own companies. We had someone who just started a paleo food products company that got off the ground. It's been incredibly rewarding to see what you can do when you ask someone, hey, what are you interested in? And then give them the resources to help support what they're doing along the way. Almost 89% are employable, have taken or received a job offer in the field of their choosing by the end of the program. And I think that this sounds great, but when you go and check what universities are doing, in the US, universities are doing about 25%. And it's sad that you only have to beat 25% to be doing better than universities are doing. And I wish that we could hold universities and colleges to a much higher standard. This is a student of ours, Tim, who came to gap year after dropping out of college. He's now working at a company called Light, which is making a new camera that was featured in MIT's TR35 review this year. We also had a student called Carrie, who came to gap year after being rejected from her top choice colleges, came to us, wrote about her experience reapplying, and is now going on a full ride to a university in Philadelphia. So it's been a really rewarding to see that it seems what we're doing is working. And last year, we had someone in Sao Paulo say, hey, this is really cool. I want to do this in Brazil. And so he came and visited us during the summer. We recorded what we're doing and said, hey, here you go. And so we have a location in Sao Paulo and interest in other places in replicating this kind of educational model so that we can give students more choices to learn about what they're interested in. We get people all the time saying, hey, what's next? We get applications from people who are in their 30s and say, I don't really want to do an MBA, but I want some time to reinvent myself. And I think there's so much opportunity for people who are interested in learning, not just as an 18-year-old, but all across their lives. Like I said, what I really want to drive home is that changes in education are not coming, they're really here. And it seems that educational institutions are starting to catch up. It's been really rewarding the last couple of years to be able to watch an industry that's thousands of years old change, and I look forward to guiding it in the future. Thank you.